What kind of billionaire stakes his legacy on a complete stranger? And what kind of woman walks through a door and flips his entire world upside down? When Colin Mercer made a bold vow to marry the next woman who entered the room, he never imagined she'd be homeless. He definitely didn't see his past, his future, and his tightly guarded heart unraveling right in front of her. What started as a reckless challenge quickly spiraled into something far more dangerous, a scandal big enough to burn down everything he built. Stick around, because what she does next. Even the man who gave her everything never saw it coming. What kind of man pledges marriage to a stranger on impulse? And what kind of woman answers that moment with a truth that rewrites everything he thought he knew? The Grand Oak Bistro shimmered beneath the Seattle skyline, its golden lights dancing across towering windows. The soft chime of crystal glasses rang out over murmured deals and the quiet laughter of the city's elite. Tucked in a corner booth with a view of Puget Sound sat Colin Mercer, a man who didn't just own businesses, but buildings, blocks, half the skyline. Really. At 47, Richard wasn't just wealthy, he was a symbol. Once a ruthless investor, now a high-profile philanthropist, the media had crowned him the Ice King of Silicon Terrace. But tonight, if you looked close enough, that ice was starting to melt. He turned his Bordeaux in slow circles, the wine swirling like the thoughts running through his mind. "You've got that look again," said Marcus Doyle, his lawyer and oldest friend. "Not the business," Richard muttered, eyes on the glass. "The business is solid. It's the legacy that's falling apart." Daniel lifted an eyebrow. "Still stuck on the heir issue?" Richard's jaw clenched. "You know how I was raised. The company passed from father to son, generation after generation. But me? I've got no one." "You've got Chloe," Daniel said gently. "Your daughter's brilliant, Richard." "She." "It's not the same," Richard cut in, his voice sharper than he meant. A few heads turned. He forced a tight smile and lowered his tone. "I love Chloe. But to the board, to the legacy, it doesn't matter. They expect a son, a male heir." Daniel frowned. "It's 2025. That mindset is ancient and, frankly, cruel." "Then go argue with my father's will," Richard said bitterly. "He left me an empire and a burden I can't pass down." Daniel went quiet. He knew Richard too well. Knew the weight of a failed marriage to Lauren. Knew how Richard had pushed her away chasing legacy instead of love. Then, something flickered in Richard's eyes. He set his wine down with sudden purpose. "I'm done waiting for fate to fix this." Richard's voice tightened, not with fear, but with a kind of reckless thrill. "Let's make things interesting," he said, leaning forward. Daniel squinted, suspicious. "What exactly does that mean?" "A bet," Richard replied coolly, turning his gaze to the front doors of the restaurant. "The next woman who walks through that door, I'm going to marry her." Daniel nearly spit out his drink. "Have you completely lost your mind?" "Maybe," Richard answered, a crooked grin forming. "But I've spent my life chasing logic and legacy. Now I want something wild. Something real. Something unpredictable." Daniel shook his head. "And if she's whoever she is," Richard cut in, "she'll be mine." And just like that, the doors opened. The room seemed to freeze in time. A thick hush rolled through the air like a fog. Every eye turned to the entrance. But instead of a runway model in heels or a polished corporate attorney, in walked someone entirely unexpected. A woman with tangled black hair, dirt on her jeans, and a face that looked both too young and too tired at the same time. She didn't fit in, and everyone in the restaurant knew it. Her name was Nina Alvarez, and she had no idea her life was about to take a turn she never saw coming. She stepped inside carefully, her wide eyes scanning the room like she'd walked into another universe. Her hands clutched the frayed straps of a torn backpack, as if it were the only anchor she had left. Whispers rippled through the dining room. A waitress started walking toward her. So did security. But before anyone could reach her, Richard stood. "Wait," he said, loud enough to cut through the tension in the air. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. "I invited her." Even Daniel's mouth fell open. Without hesitation, Richard crossed the room and walked directly up to her, ignoring the stares and the disbelief swirling behind him. "Good evening," he said, smiling like she was the guest of honor. "I'm Colin Mercer. Would you like to join me for dinner?" Grace stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Her eyes darted to the security guards, then back to the man in the $1,000 suit holding his hand out like she was royalty. Her voice came out slow, husky from the cold. My name's Grace." "Grace," Richard repeated softly, as if the word held weight. "That's a beautiful name." She hesitated. Then, slowly, she reached out and placed her rough, calloused hand in his. Behind them, Daniel could only sit in stunned silence, whispering under his breath. "What the hell are you doing?" Daniel muttered under his breath, too low for anyone else to catch. Meanwhile, across the city in a modest Capitol Hill apartment, Vanessa Mercer sat with her coffee and scrolled through the morning news on her phone. The headline hit her like cold water. "Billionaire Colin Mercer sparks scandal with homeless woman at Grand Oak Bistro." She blinked at the screen, speechless for a moment. "Oh God, Richard, what did you do now?" Back at Richard's penthouse, Grace sat awkwardly on a sleek leather sofa, surrounded by walls covered in art worth more than she'd ever seen in one place. She looked around, tense. Why am I here? She asked, her voice flat but guarded. What do you want from me? Richard sat across from her, his expression open, steady. You, he said simply. I want to marry you. Grace jolted to her feet, nearly knocking over her untouched coffee. What kind of twisted joke is this? She snapped. I'm not some experiment to make you feel better about your life. It's not a joke, Richard said quickly, his voice calm but urgent. I made a promise, and then you walked through that door. You don't even know me. Maybe I want to, he replied. Grace shook her head slowly, disbelief etched into every line of her face. This is insane. But there was something in his voice, something quiet and cracked, not the voice of a man who was playing games. More like someone who'd spent his life pretending he had it all, when deep down, he'd been running on empty. Still, she didn't trust it. Not yet. A life like hers had taught her the hard way. Nothing comes free. Not ever. While that tension simmered in the penthouse, Lauren reached for a number she hadn't dialed in months. Daniel? It's me. There was a beat before his voice came through, low and serious. You're not gonna believe this. Try me. He's serious, Lauren. He's really going through with it. Going through with what? He's marrying her. A woman he just met last night. Lauren's breath caught. For a second, the world tilted under her feet. She didn't know who this woman was, but one thing was clear, whoever she was, she just stepped into something way bigger than herself. Do you believe in love at first sight, or is this just desperation dressed in designer clothes? Grace couldn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of a bed that felt more like a movie set than a place to rest. The sheets were too soft. The silence too perfect. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Seattle skyline glowed like something out of a dream. But for Grace, it didn't feel like her dream. Just 72 hours ago, she'd curled up on a park bench trying to stay warm. And now? She kept replaying his words in her head. I want to marry you. It wasn't just outrageous, it was dangerous. When the early morning light started creeping in, she found herself in the penthouse kitchen, a warm mug of coffee in her hands. Richard walked in, dressed in a dark sweater and jeans, completely different from the sharp-suited version of himself the night before. His face lit up when he saw her. Did you get any sleep? Grace didn't answer. She just stared at him. Why are you really doing this? She asked finally. He paused, then nodded slowly. I meant what I said. I made a vow, and I plan to keep it. A vow? She asked, setting her mug down a little harder than she meant to. Grace set the mug down with a quiet thud, just a little harder than she meant to. To who? She asked, eyes narrowing. Your ego? Your legacy? Or is this just another performance to patch whatever hole's eating at your heart? The question hit him harder than he let on. He paused, then said softly, maybe all of it. He looked up. I steady now. But when you walked through that door, something shifted. It stopped being about the vow. Grace crossed her arms, still guarded. You don't even know me. That's why I want to take it slow, he replied. No pressure. No wedding bells tomorrow. I just want a chance to get to know you. To see if this insane idea has a real pulse. She studied him for a long, silent moment. Her defenses didn't drop, but something did stir in her curiosity, maybe even a flicker of longing. Fine, she said at last. But I need my own place. I'm not living in your glass tower. Richard smiled. Done. What followed could only be described as the strangest week of her life. He moved her into a modest apartment near Volunteer Park. Fully furnished, warm, and secure, but not extravagant. Just real. Clothes began to appear, subtle, thoughtful pieces that somehow matched her unspoken taste. Etiquette lessons were offered, never pushed. Invitations, not expectations. And yet, even with all that, Grace kept her emotional distance. She didn't trust fairy tales. She'd seen too many crash hard. She spent her mornings walking the city. Her afternoons tucked into corner cafes with worn paperbacks and warm tea. And her nights? She lay awake wondering how long it would take for the truth, the real reason he wanted her there, to finally show itself. But while she stayed quiet, the headlines did not. Billionaire walks the edge. New mystery woman in Walker's life. Cinderella or con artist? Nina Alvarez's name was everywhere now. And with every new article, Vanessa Mercer felt something twist tighter in her chest. She hadn't seen Richard this alive in years. Not since their daughter Chloe was born. And now he was tossing everything he'd once guarded with steel fists onto a woman he barely knew. She picked up her phone. Daniel, she said. I need to meet her. Grace was sipping coffee at a cafe downtown when the woman appeared. Dark blonde hair. Power blazer. Controlled steps that spoke of someone used to boardrooms and confrontation. Grace recognized her immediately. You're Lauren, she said before the woman had even reached the table. Lauren slid into the seat across from her. And you're Grace, she replied smoothly. The woman my ex-husband met on a dare and somehow decided to rewrite his entire future for. Grace raised a brow. So, you came to warn me? No, Lauren said, surprising even herself. I came to understand you. Because if this is real, and you're serious, then you deserve to know exactly what kind of storm you've walked into. They sat together for almost an hour. Lauren didn't come to attack Richard or trash his name. Instead, she told the truth, stories about his ambition, his obsession with legacy, and how that obsession ended up ruining the good parts of his life. It had destroyed their marriage. It had even wrecked pieces of her. Grace didn't interrupt once. She just listened. When Lauren finally stood to leave, she paused and looked at her. "I don't hate you, Grace," she said quietly. "And I'm not here to blame you. But I need to know something. Are you just a passing storm in his life? Or something more? Because my daughter is watching. And this matters." Grace's hands trembled slightly as she picked up her cup again. That moment hit hard. Suddenly, this wasn't some bizarre fairy tale anymore. It was real. And it came with weight, with consequences. Later that night, Grace stood outside Richard's office. She knocked. He was on a call, but the second he saw her face, he ended it. "What's wrong?" he asked. She walked in slowly. "Your ex-wife came to see me." He blinked. "What? What?" She wanted to be sure I understood what I was walking into. She wasn't angry, Richard. She was heartbroken. Richard stood, rubbing the back of his neck. "Grace, I didn't mean to drag you into." "I know," she said, cutting him off softly. "But this is bigger than you. Bigger than me. You've got a daughter, a legacy, a whole life behind you. And I'm just crashing into it." He stepped toward her, his voice low and sure. "You're not crashing into anything. You're changing it." Her voice cracked then, just slightly. "I don't know if I can do this. I've spent years surviving, Richard, not living. And now you want me to step into this perfect glass world and act like I belong." "No," he whispered, eyes steady. "I don't want you to act. I want you to be exactly who you are." For the first time, she didn't flinch. But outside that office door, Lauren stood in silence, watching through the glass. And she wasn't the only one keeping an eye on things. Because miles away, in a dark corner office, an older man sat alone. He held a newspaper in one hand, the headline glaring. "Colin Mercer's fairy tale romance shocks Seattle." He chuckled bitterly. "Still too sentimental," he muttered. Then he reached for his phone. "Activate the contingency plan," he said coldly. Time to shake the foundation of his perfect little fantasy. So, what exactly was Richard hiding? And who, or what, was about to come knocking on his door? Here's a question for you. If your ex met your new partner, and instead of fighting, they connected, would that make you feel more secure or more suspicious? The call came just after midnight. Richard stood by the massive penthouse windows, the city of Seattle glowing beneath him like veins of fire. He held a glass of untouched scotch in one hand. His phone buzzed again. It was Daniel, for the third time in an hour. This time he picked up. "We've got a problem," Daniel said. No greeting. No pause. "How bad?" Richard asked. "Board-level bad," Daniel replied. "Someone's leaking financial records. They're trying to build a case that you misused company funds, said you spent it all on Grace." Richard's stomach dropped. "They're spinning it hard," Daniel continued. "The apartment, the clothes, that night at the opera, they're saying it was all company-funded. Framed as some kind of personal social experiment. This isn't just a hit piece, Richard. It's a full-blown coup." Richard stood by the window, eyes locked on the Seattle skyline. Deep down, he should have seen this coming. In his world, love was allowed to be polished, clean, strategic, not raw, not this real, not this messy. And now? The board had called an emergency meeting for noon tomorrow. And they weren't just raising questions, they were demanding he step down. Meanwhile, across town in a quiet cafe near Capitol Hill, Grace sat alone. Her phone lit up again and again, headline after headline scrolling past like falling dominoes. Her heart pounded as she read. Billionaire's romance sparks financial scandal. The fall of Colin Mercer. From park bench to penthouse, the truth about Nina Alvarez. She was so lost in the noise she barely noticed when Vanessa Mercer quietly slid into the seat across from her. "I figured I'd find you here," Lauren said softly. Grace looked up. Her face gave nothing away. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said. "I know," Lauren replied, her voice steady. "But the world doesn't care about truth. They care about a villain. And you? You walked in at just the right time to become one." Grace held her gaze. "So why are you here?" Lauren exhaled. "Because I've watched Richard mess up every good thing he's ever had. But I've never seen him fight for anyone the way he fights for you. And I think, no, I know, he's never needed someone's help more than he does now." Grace's throat tightened. "I didn't ask for any of this. All I wanted was a chance." "Then take it," Lauren said. "Not just for him, for you." The next morning, chaos buzzed outside the Walker building. Reporters packed the sidewalks, cameras flashing, questions flying. Inside, on the 29th floor, the boardroom was full of cold suits and even colder stares. Richard stood at the head of the long glass table, his tie loosened but his spine unshaken. "I didn't misuse company funds," he said firmly. "Every dollar spent came from my personal account. You brought chaos into this company," one board member fired back. "You've made a joke of the legacy we've worked to protect." Richard's eyes narrowed. "I built this legacy," he shot back. "And maybe you've all forgotten, but it was built on risk. on doing what no one else had the courage to try. Before anyone could respond, the doors swung open. Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras clicked outside. Nina Alvarez stepped into the room. Her voice was calm, her posture steady. "I know I wasn't invited," she said, "but I need to speak." One of the board members immediately pushed back. "This is a private meeting. She has no business here." "She's staying," Richard said firmly, not even blinking. Grace looked around the room, meeting every stare without flinching. "I don't want Richard's money. I'm not after his empire," she began, her voice steady. "I didn't ask him to pull me out of the shadows, but he did." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. "For weeks, I waited for him to change his mind. I thought the moment he saw who I really was, he'd walk away." Another pause. But he didn't. He just kept showing up. The room fell silent. "I'm not the fairy tale you were hoping for," she continued. "And I'm not going to pretend to be. But I am honest. I've slept on sidewalks. I've gone hungry. I've lived invisible." Her voice sharpened just slightly. "And I would rather go back to that life, every painful part of it, than stand here and let you destroy a man for loving someone who didn't come from a country club." For a long moment, no one said a word. Then, slowly, the oldest board member leaned forward. "Miss Miller," he asked, "if it's not about the money or the fame, why are you still here?" Grace turned to Richard. Her voice was soft but certain. "Because I love him. But more than that, because for the first time in my life, someone looked at me and believed I was enough. Not pretty enough. Not wealthy enough. Just enough." And that was the moment everything changed. The board voted. And against every prediction, Richard kept his seat on one condition. He would step back from day-to-day operations and appoint a co-director. He chose his daughter, Chloe. 6 weeks later, under golden autumn leaves in Discovery Park, Grace stood in a simple white dress. There were no TV crews, no designer gowns, no press releases, just the people who mattered. Friends, family, the ones who stayed. Richard stood beside her in a gray suit, his eyes soft, his hands steady. Daniel delivered a speech so unexpectedly emotional it left half the guests wiping their eyes. Lauren stood beside Chloe, who wore a dusty rose dress and held the wedding rings gently in her palm. When the minister asked if Grace would take Richard as her husband, she laughed, not out of mockery. It was the kind of laugh that escapes when you can't believe how far you've come. "I do," she whispered. She whispered her vows, the words barely audible over the rustle of leaves. As the reception slowly faded into the golden glow of sunset, Richard and Grace slipped away to a quiet bench beneath the trees. No cameras, no crowds, just them. "I still can't believe this actually happened," Grace said, leaning into his side. "Neither can I," Richard replied, wrapping an arm around her. "But I'd go through all of it again, the scandals, the rumors, the mess, if it meant ending up right here." She looked at him, and for the first time in her life, her eyes didn't hold fear or caution or fight. They held something deeper, peace. They didn't move back into the penthouse. That life no longer fit. Instead, they chose a modest brownstone in Greenwood. Cozy, quiet, real. Grace refused to quit her job at the women's shelter, said it grounded her, kept her honest. Richard picked up something new too, teaching one night a week at a local college. The course? Introduction to Legacy Finance, rewritten with soul. Together, they launched the Grace Initiative, a nonprofit supporting job training and transitional housing for women who had lived through what Grace had survived. And then, one afternoon, Lauren dropped off an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "You didn't just save Richard. You saved all of us. Thank you, Lauren." In time, even the headline shifted. No longer, "Billionaire falls," but "Grace rises." Now it's your turn. What did this story mean to you? Do you believe in second chances like Grace and Richard's? Drop in the comments if you do. Tell us where you're watching from and whether you think love is still worth fighting for, even when the odds feel impossible. Because sometimes, it's not where you come from that defines you. It's where you dare to go next.